In the golden halls of Asgard, where gods once walked and legends were born, there lived a goddess whose beauty could stop the sun, whose magic could bend fate, and whose story we will explore together tonight as you rest and find your way to sleep. This is the story of Freyja, a name that echoes through the ages, carried on the winds of the north, whispered in ancient poems, and remembered in the hearts of those who understood that divinity comes in many forms. She was not merely a goddess of one thing, but of many: love and war, beauty and death, joy and sorrow. She contained within herself all the contradictions that make existence both terrible and wonderful, and in doing so, she became one of the most beloved figures in all of Norse mythology. Chapter 1: Opening and Introduction to Freyja. To understand Freyja, we must first understand that she was not born among the Aesir, the gods most people think of when they imagine Norse mythology. She was not raised in the golden halls of Asgard alongside Thor and Odin and the others. No, Freyja came from somewhere else, from another tribe of gods entirely, a people called the Vanir. The Vanir were older in some ways, more connected to the earth and sea, to fertility and prosperity, to the natural magic that flows through all living things. The Aesir and the Vanir were not always friends. In fact, there was a time when they were at war, a great conflict that shook all the 9 realms and threatened to tear apart the very fabric of existence. But that war eventually ended, as all wars must, and in its ending came something unexpected. Peace, yes, but more than that. Understanding, exchange. And it was through this exchange that Freyja came to live in Asgard, bringing with her the wisdom and magic of her people, forever changing the world of the Aesir gods. Tonight, we will journey through Freyja's story, taking our time, letting each moment breathe, allowing the ancient world of the Norse gods to surround us like a comfortable blanket on a cold northern night. Let us begin at the beginning, in a realm of forests and rivers, where our goddess first opened her eyes to the world. Chapter 2: Origins and Birth. Vanaheim was a place unlike Asgard, where Asgard was all golden towers and great halls, built by skill and ambition. Vanaheim was organic, natural, a realm that seemed to have grown rather than been built. Great forests stretched as far as the eye could see, their trees ancient beyond reckoning. Rivers ran clear and pure, teeming with fish and life. The very air seemed to hum with magic, not the dramatic magic of thunder and lightning, but the quiet magic of seeds becoming plants, of seasons turning, of life continuing in its eternal cycle. It was here that Njord lived, the god of the sea and of prosperity, of sailors and fishermen, of all those who made their living from the waters. Njord was powerful in his own right, respected and honored among the Vanir, and he had 2 children who would become even more significant than himself. Twins, born together, connected in ways that went beyond mere siblinghood. Their names were Freyja and Freyr. From the moment of their birth, it was clear that these twins were special. Freyr would eventually become a god of fertility and sunshine, of peace and prosperity, loved by all who knew him. But it was Freyja who would shine the brightest, whose name would be remembered longest, whose story would become legend. Even as a young goddess, Freyja possessed an extraordinary beauty. When she walked, flowers would bloom in her footsteps. When she smiled, the sun seemed to shine more brightly. Her hair was like gold, her eyes like the summer sky, and there was something about her presence that made everyone who encountered her feel as though they were experiencing something sacred, something rare and precious. But Freyja was not simply beautiful. She was intelligent, curious, hungry to understand the world around her. She studied with the wise ones of Vanaheim, learning the art of cedar, the ancient magic that dealt with fate and destiny, with prophecy and transformation. This was magic that required not strength but subtlety, not force but finesse. It was considered by many to be women's magic, shamanic and mysterious, and Freyja mastered it completely. Those were peaceful days in Vanaheim, days of learning and growing, of Freyja and Freyr exploring their realm together, of long summers and gentle winters, of a world in balance. But peace cannot last forever. The trouble began with a figure named Gullveig, who came to Asgard sent by the Vanir. The Aesir did not trust her, feared the magic she practiced, and they did something terrible. 3 times they tried to kill her, burning her in their great hall, and 3 times she was reborn from the flames. News of this reached Vanaheim, and the Vanir were outraged, and so began a war that would rage for years, a conflict between 2 groups of gods, both powerful, both determined, neither able to gain a decisive advantage over the other. The 9 realms shook with the force of divine fury, but eventually both sides began to realize that this war could not be won. Slowly, carefully, negotiations began, and finally, after much debate, a solution was reached. Chapter 3. The Great Exchange. There would be peace, but not just peace. There would be unity. The 2 tribes of gods would join together, combining their strengths, sharing their knowledge. And to seal this peace, to ensure that both sides honored the agreement, there would be an exchange. The Vanir would send some of their most important members to live in Asgard, and the Aesir would send their own to Vanaheim. And so it was decided that Njord would go to Asgard, taking with him his 2 children, Freyja and Freyr. This was no small thing. These were some of the most important figures in Vanaheim. For Freyja, it meant leaving behind everything she had ever known. Her home, her friends, the forests and rivers of Vanaheim. She was going to Asgard, to live among those who had until recently been her enemy. The journey to Asgard was strange, traveling the paths between worlds that only gods could navigate. And then finally, they arrived at the gates, and Freyja saw for the first time the realm that would become her new home. Asgard was magnificent, the great hall of Valhalla rising in the distance, the rainbow bridge Bifrost shimmering in the light, the massive walls that surrounded the realm. Everything here spoke of power, of ambition, of gods who built monuments to their own glory. The Aesir came to greet them, Odin, the All-Father, wisest and most cunning of gods, Thor, the thunder god, powerful and brave, Frigg, Odin's wife, graceful and knowing, and so many others. There was curiosity in their eyes, certainly, and perhaps some lingering suspicion. Yet there was also respect. The Vanir had proven themselves formidable, and now they were here, offering peace. Freyja stood before them, and even the Aesir, accustomed as they were to divine beauty, found themselves impressed. There was something about her that commanded attention through simple presence. Odin stepped forward to welcome them formally, promising that the Vanir would be honored in Asgard, that they would have their own halls, their own place in the divine order. Freyja was given her own hall called Sessrumnir, located in Folkvangr, a beautiful meadow where flowers bloomed eternally. This would be Freyja's domain, her own piece of Asgard. She made it a place of beauty and welcome, and gradually as time passed, Freyja became not just a resident of Asgard, but a beloved member of its community. The Aesir came to respect her, not just for her beauty, but for her wisdom, her kindness, her power. Chapter 4. Freyja's Domains and Powers. As Freyja settled into her life in Asgard, the full extent of her nature began to reveal itself. She was the goddess of love and beauty, certainly. Her own appearance was so striking that it became legendary. The poets would struggle to find words adequate to describe her, comparing her hair to gold, her eyes to precious gems, though these comparisons always fell short. But Freyja's domain over love extended far beyond her own beauty. She had power over the hearts of others, both gods and mortals. Those who prayed to her for help in matters of love often found their prayers answered. A shy suitor might suddenly find courage. Lovers separated by distance might find their way back to each other. She understood love in all its forms, the passionate romance of new lovers, the deep companionship of those together for years, the love between parents and children, between friends. She honored all of it. Freyja was also a goddess of fertility and abundance. Farmers would pray to her for good harvests. Women hoping to conceive would make offerings at her shrines. Merchants would invoke her name before important ventures. And often, she answered, fields blessed by Freyja would yield abundant crops. Women under her favor would find themselves expecting children. Business ventures would succeed beyond hope. She brought abundance in all the ways life can be rich and full. But Freyja was not only gentle. She had another side that surprised those who knew her only as the goddess of love. Freyja was also a goddess of war and death, a chooser of the slain. She claimed half of those who died in battle, with the other half going to Odin's Valhalla. The warriors who came to her hall were honored and valued, spending their afterlife in her presence, preparing for the final battle of Ragnarok. This seems contradictory at first. How could the same goddess represent both love and war, both creation and destruction? But the Norse understood that existence is full of such contradictions, that the same force can create and destroy, that life and death are not opposites, but partners in the great dance of being. Perhaps most importantly, Freyja was the greatest practitioner of cedar magic, the ancient art she had learned in Vanaheim. Cedar was subtle, complex, deeply shamanic, dealing with fate and prophecy, with transformation and hidden knowledge. Through Cedar one could see the future, shapeshift, work subtle influences on luck and fate. It was considered women's magic, and Freyja was its undisputed master. Remarkably, she taught this magic to the Aesir. Even Odin himself, the All-Father, came to Freyja to learn satyr. This must have been humbling for him, admitting that this Vanir goddess knew something he did not. But Freyja taught him freely, sharing the secrets of Vanir magic, helping to truly unite the two tribes of gods. Chapter 5. Sacred Symbols and Possessions. Among all of Freyja's possessions, one stood out above all others. It was a necklace called Brisingamen, and it was the most beautiful piece of jewelry ever created. The name means something like necklace of fire or brightness, suggesting that it shone with its own inner light. It was wrought from gold and set with gems that captured and reflected light in ways that seemed almost magical. When Freyja wore Brisingamen, which she almost always did, it rested against her throat and chest, drawing the eye, complementing her beauty, somehow making her seem even more radiant. It became so associated with her that one could barely imagine Freyja without it. The necklace was not merely jewelry, but part of her identity, a symbol of everything she was. Brisingamen was more than just beautiful. It was powerful. Some sources suggest it enhanced Freyja's magic, amplifying her abilities. Others hint that it granted her protection, that no one could harm her while she wore it. Still others suggest it was connected to her domain over love and desire, that its beauty inspired passion in all who saw it. Freyja also possessed a cloak made of falcon feathers, a magical garment that allowed whoever wore it to take the form of a falcon and fly through the skies. This was incredibly valuable, granting the power of flight and transformation. The cloak appears in several myths, sometimes worn by Freyja herself, but often borrowed by other gods when they needed its power. Loki seemed particularly fond of asking to borrow it, and Freyja, generous as she was, would usually agree. The choice of a falcon is significant. Falcons are birds of prey, swift and keen-sighted, able to see things from great heights that those on the ground might miss. They represent freedom, the ability to soar above earthly concerns, to gain perspective. For Freyja to have such a cloak speaks to her ability to rise above, to see larger patterns, to move between worlds with ease. Freyja traveled in a chariot pulled by two large cats. The sources describe these as substantial felines, likely resembling Norwegian forest cats, gray in color, beautiful and sleek, and powerful enough to pull a divine chariot across the sky. Cats were valued in Norse society for their hunting ability, their independence, their mysterious nature. For Freyja to have cats pulling her chariot spoke to her own independence, her mysterious quality, her connection to feminine power. She also had a companion boar named Hildisvini, which means battle swine. This boar had golden bristles that shone in the light, and he was large and powerful. Boars held important symbolic meaning in Norse culture. They were fierce fighters when cornered, but also connected to fertility and abundance, as pigs were valuable livestock. The dual nature of the boar, both dangerous and beneficial, perfectly matched Freyja's own complexity. Chapter 6. The Tale of Brisingamen. Now let us turn to one of the most famous stories about Freyja, the tale of how she acquired the necklace Brisingamen. One day, Freyja was walking through Midgard, simply exploring, enjoying the mortal realm. She came across a large stone with a crack, an opening that led down into darkness. From that passage came a faint glow, the light of forge fires burning far below. Freyja knew what this was. She had found an entrance to Svartalfheim, the realm of the dwarves. The dwarves were master craftsmen, the finest in all the 9 realms, creators of Thor's hammer Mjolnir, Odin's spear Gungnir, and countless other legendary items. Drawn by curiosity and perhaps by fate, Freyja entered the tunnel and followed it down until it opened into a vast cavern. And there she saw a forge and 4 dwarves working at their craft. The dwarves' names were Alfrig, Dvalin, Burling, and Grer, and they were creating something extraordinary, something that caught Freyja's breath the moment she saw it. A necklace, still unfinished but already breathtaking. Gold worked into intricate patterns, woven together in ways that seemed impossible. And set into the gold were gems of such clarity and brilliance that they seemed to contain captured starlight. Freyja stood transfixed. She had seen beautiful things before, owned many treasures, but this necklace was something else entirely. It was perfect, and immediately, with an intensity that surprised even herself, Freyja knew she had to have it. She stepped forward, making her presence known. The dwarves looked up, surprised but recognizing divinity when they saw it. Freyja asked about the necklace, praised their craftsmanship. She asked if it was for sale. The dwarves told her they had created it for themselves, for the joy of the craft. It was not for sale, but Freyja was not deterred. She offered to buy it, offering any price in gold or silver, magical items, favors from the gods. But the dwarves refused all of this. Finally, she asked directly what price they would accept, and the 4 dwarves looked at her and smiled. They would give her the necklace if she would spend 1 night with each of them, 4 nights in total. It was an outrageous demand. The difference in status was immense. But Freyja stood there in the forge, the unfinished necklace glittering before her, and she thought about it. She could refuse, could walk away, or she could agree, could pay their price, could get what she wanted regardless of what anyone else might think. And Freyja, who was goddess of love but also of desire, who understood that wanting something intensely was its own kind of power, said yes. She agreed to their terms, and so it happened. For 4 nights Freyja stayed in that underground forge, fulfilling her part of the bargain. And on the 5th day, the dwarves completed the necklace and gave it to her as promised. Freyja took Brisingamen and fastened it around her neck, and even in the dim light of the underground forge, it blazed with beauty. Whatever she had paid, the necklace was worth it. She returned to Asgard wearing Brisingamen, and for a time, her secret was safe. But secrets have a way of being discovered. Loki, the trickster god who made it his business to know everyone's secrets, followed Freyja and learned the truth. He discovered where the necklace had come from and what price she had paid. And Loki, being Loki, immediately went to Odin with this information. Odin saw an opportunity to gain leverage over Freyja. He commanded Loki to steal the necklace. That night, Loki crept to Thrym. He transformed himself into a fly and slipped through a crack in the wall. Inside, he found Freyja asleep, Brisingamen around her neck. The clasp was at the back of her neck, underneath her, impossible to reach. But Loki transformed into a flea and bit Freyja on the cheek, just enough to make her roll over. When she did, the clasp was exposed. Quickly, Loki unfastened the necklace and took it. When Freyja woke and discovered the necklace missing, she was devastated. She went immediately to Odin, and he admitted he had the necklace. But he would return it only if she agreed to a condition. She must use her powers to stir up conflict in Midgard, to provoke war between mortal kings, to ensure warriors continued to die in battle, so that Odin and Freyja could claim them for their halls. It was a terrible bargain, but Freyja agreed. She wanted Brisingamen back too much to refuse, and so Odin returned the necklace, though now it must have felt different, heavier, purchased twice, the second time at a price that weighed on her conscience. Chapter 7. Freyja's Lost Husband Odin. Despite her many aspects and adventures, there was one person Freyja truly loved above all others. His name was Odin, and he was her husband. Who exactly Odin was remains mysterious. The sources tell us little about him. Some believe he might have been one of the Aesir. Others suggest he was human. Still others think he might have been another Vanir god. What we know for certain is that Freyja and Odin were married, that they loved each other deeply, and that together they had 2 daughters. The girls were named Nos and Gersemi, names that mean treasure and precious. For a time, Freyja must have been truly happy. She had her hall, her place among the gods, her powers and treasures. But more importantly, she had love, genuine, deep love, and children to raise. Everything must have seemed perfect, but perfection never lasts. One day, without warning or explanation, Odin left. He simply vanished, departing on some journey for some purpose that he did not explain. The sources do not tell us why. Some suggest he was restless, unable to settle. Others hint that he might have been cursed or compelled to wander. Still others suggest he might have gone in search of something he felt he needed. Whatever the reason, he left, and he did not return. Days passed, then weeks, then longer, and still there was no word from Odin. Freyja waited, at first patient, then worried, then increasingly desperate. The not knowing was perhaps the worst part, and as time passed and Odin did not return, Freyja began to weep. She cried tears of sorrow and longing, of love and loss, of hope that refused to die. And her tears, because she was a goddess, were not ordinary tears. When they fell to the ground, they turned to gold. When they fell into the sea, they became amber, that beautiful fossilized resin that glows with warm light. Even in her grief, Freyja created beauty. But Freyja did not simply sit and weep. She was not the type to accept loss passively. If Odin would not return to her, then she would go find him. And so began a search that would take her across all the 9 realms, a quest that would last for years, perhaps for centuries, perhaps ongoing even now. Freyja left Asgard and went wandering. She traveled through Midgard, searching in every village and town, every wilderness and wasteland. She took different names to move freely without everyone knowing a goddess walked among them. She called herself Mardal, Horn, Geirfinn, Seer, and many other names. She searched in Jotunheim, the land of giants. She went to the halls of other gods. She consulted wise women, asking them to use their magic to locate Odrar. She followed every rumor, every hint, every possibility. But despite all her searching, despite all her efforts and magic and determination, Freyja never found Odar. He remained lost, vanished into the vastness of the 9 realms. This aspect of Freyja's story is perhaps the most poignant. Here was a goddess of love who could not keep the love she valued most. Here was a goddess of immense power who was powerless to solve this one problem that mattered more than anything else. Yet Freyja never gave up hope. She never declared Odin dead, never took another husband, never stopped believing that somehow, someday, she might find him again. And in the meantime, she continued her life, performing her duties, helping those who prayed to her, being the goddess of love even while her own heart ached. There was strength in that, the strength to continue, to love and help others even when you are hurting. Chapter 8. Freyja and the Giants. Giants and gods were ancient enemies, locked in a struggle that would last until Ragnarok. But occasionally, giants and gods would interact in ways that were not simply violent. One such interaction involved Freyja directly and nearly resulted in catastrophe. This happened after the Aesir-Vanir War, when Asgard's walls had been damaged in the conflict. Into this situation came a stranger who offered his services. He was a builder, he said, who could rebuild Asgard's walls in just 3 seasons. The gods asked what price he would demand, expecting gold or treasure. But the builder's price was not gold. He demanded the sun, the moon, and the goddess Freyja as his payment. The gods were shocked. To give away the sun and moon would plunge the worlds into eternal darkness, and to give away Freyja was unthinkable. They began to refuse, but then Loki suggested they accept with conditions. They would agree if he completed the work in the specified time, but he would have to do it alone, and they would shorten the time limit slightly, making it even more impossible. The task seemed beyond one person, so they could benefit from however much work he did, and then refuse payment when he inevitably failed. The builder agreed with one condition. He wanted to use his horse, Svadilfari, to help transport materials. The gods saw no harm in this and agreed, and so the builder set to work. Immediately it became clear this was no ordinary man. He worked with supernatural speed and strength, and his horse was equally extraordinary. Day after day, the walls of Asgard rose higher and stronger, growing at an impossible pace. The gods began to worry. As the deadline approached, they realized with growing horror that he was actually going to complete the task. That meant they would owe him the sun, the moon, and Freyja. Freyja was terrified. She went to the other gods, demanding they find a way out of this situation. They turned on Loki, furious. This had been his idea. He needed to fix it, to make the builder fail. And if he could not, they made it clear Loki would suffer terrible consequences. Loki agreed to solve the problem. The deadline was approaching fast. The builder had only one more day of work, just a few final stones to place. As evening approached and the builder went to collect the final load with Svadilfari pulling the heavy sledge, something unexpected happened. Out of the forest came a mare, a beautiful female horse. Svadilfari, caught by sudden desire, broke free and chased after the mare, disappearing into the trees. The builder, suddenly without his horse, tried desperately to complete the work himself. But he could not do in one evening what required both himself and his horse. As the deadline passed, the walls remained incomplete. The builder flew into a rage, and as he raged, his disguise fell away, revealing his true nature. He was not a man but a giant, one of the Jotun, who had infiltrated Asgard hoping to win a great prize. The gods felt their oath no longer bound them. They had made an agreement with a builder, not knowing he was a giant. At that moment, Thor returned to Asgard. He arrived to find a giant raging inside the walls, and Thor, being Thor, saw a simple solution. He lifted his hammer Mjolnir and struck the giant down, ending the threat. The crisis was over. Asgard's walls were mostly repaired, the work done at no real cost, and Freyja was safe. As for the mare who had lured Svadilfari away, she was, of course, Loki in disguise. He had saved the situation through trickery and personal sacrifice. Months later, Loki gave birth to Sleipnir, the eight-legged horse who would become Odin's mount. Chapter 9. Thrym's Stolen Hammer. Another story involving Freyja and giants is perhaps more famous, and certainly more amusing. One morning, Thor woke to discover that his hammer Mjolnir was missing. This was a catastrophe. Thor without his hammer was far less able to defend Asgard. The hammer was not just a weapon, but a key element of divine defenses. Thor sought out Loki and told him what had happened. Loki volunteered to investigate. He went to Freyja and asked to borrow her falcon cloak. Freyja, understanding the seriousness, agreed immediately. Loki put on the cloak, transformed into falcon form, and flew off to search. His search led him to Jotunheim, to the hall of a giant named Thrym, and Thrym clearly knew something about the missing hammer. Loki asked if Thrym knew anything about Thor's hammer. Thrym laughed and admitted freely that he had stolen it, hidden it deep underground. Loki asked what it would take to get it back, and Thrym's answer was direct. He would return Mjolnir if the gods sent him Freyja to be his bride. Loki returned to Asgard with this news and reported to the assembled gods. And as expected, there was immediate uproar. Freyja's reaction was volcanic. She was absolutely furious, more angry than any of the gods had ever seen her. The hall of Asgard literally shook with her rage. She shouted that she would never agree to this, that she would not be traded like property. Her anger was so intense that the necklace Brisingamen broke from her throat and fell to the floor. The walls trembled, and she was absolutely right to be angry. Once again, someone wanted to take her, to possess her, to use her as payment. It was insulting, degrading, completely unacceptable. The gods could see there was no way Freyja would agree, but they still needed the hammer back. It was Heimdall who came up with a plan. He suggested that Thor himself should dress as Freyja, disguise himself as the bride, and go to Jotunheim. Once there, when Thrym brought out the hammer to consecrate the wedding, Thor could grab it and use it against the giants. There was a long silence. Then the gods began to laugh. Thor himself was horrified. He refused immediately. There was no way he was going to wear a bridal gown, but the other gods convinced him. They pointed out that without his hammer, his reputation meant little. They appealed to his pride, his duty, his courage. Eventually, reluctantly, Thor agreed, and so they dressed him in bridal clothes, a gown that barely fit his massive frame, a veil to hide his beard. They hung Brisingamen around his neck. Loki volunteered to go along disguised as a bridesmaid. When they arrived at Thrym's hall, the giant was overjoyed. Freyja had come. He ordered a great feast prepared. At the feast, Thor's behavior almost gave away the disguise. He ate an entire ox and 8 salmon, and drank 3 casks of mead. Thrym was astonished, but Loki explained that Freyja had been so excited about the wedding that she had not eaten for 8 days. Thrym tried to lift the veil to kiss his bride, but when he got close, he saw Thor's eyes glaring from beneath the veil, fierce and fiery, and he jumped back in alarm. Again, Loki saved the situation, explaining that Freyja had not slept for 8 nights in anticipation, and her eyes were red from exhaustion. Finally, the moment came for the wedding to be consecrated. Following tradition, Thrym ordered that Mjolnir be brought out and placed in the bride's lap. The giants brought the hammer and placed it on Thor's lap, and the moment Thor's hand closed around the familiar handle, the disguise no longer mattered. He threw off the veil, stood to his full height, and began laying waste to the giants. Thrym died first. Then Thor worked his way through the hall, making sure none escaped. The mission was a success. Thor reclaimed his hammer and returned to Asgard triumphant. And Freyja, who had never left Asgard, no doubt felt both relief and satisfaction. Her rage had been justified, and the gods had found a solution that did not require her sacrifice. Chapter 10. Freyja and Odin. The relationship between Freyja and Odin was complex and multifaceted. They were in some ways equals, both among the most powerful deities. They were also complementary, each possessing knowledge and abilities the other lacked. One of the most significant aspects of their relationship was Freyja's role as Odin's teacher. When she came to Asgard, she brought knowledge of Sadur, the mysterious Vanir magic the Aesir did not understand. Odin, ever hungry for wisdom and power, wanted to learn it. For Odin to ask anyone to teach him was significant. He was the All-Father, the wisest of gods, not accustomed to being anyone's student. But he recognized that Freyja knew something he did not. And so Freyja became Odin's teacher in the art of Sadur. She taught him how to enter trance states, to see possible futures, to work subtle influences on fate, to shapeshift. She shared freely the secrets of Vanir magic, making Odin more powerful and complete. This was not without controversy. Satyr was considered women's magic, and for a male god to practice it was seen by some as inappropriate. But Odin did not care. He wanted knowledge more than he wanted to maintain any particular image. The dynamic between teacher and student created a unique bond. Freyja had authority over Odin in this realm, was his superior in this particular knowledge, and Odin, in accepting her teaching, acknowledged that superiority gave her respect and status that went beyond her beauty or her role in the piece. Freyja and Odin also shared dominion over the dead. They were both claimers of fallen warriors, both rulers over those who died in battle. Odin ruled Valhalla, but he did not claim all who died in combat. He claimed half. The other half went to Freyja in Folkvanger, to her hall Sessrumnir. The sources are unclear about exactly how this division worked, but the key point is that Freyja had equal claim, equal rights to the glorious dead. This placed her on the same level as Odin in this respect, made her a goddess not just of love and fertility, but of death and the afterlife. This shared dominion must have created another dimension to their relationship. They were colleagues in managing the dead, in ensuring fallen warriors were claimed and brought to divine halls to await Ragnarok. Beyond their roles as teacher and student, beyond their shared dominion, the relationship had other dimensions the sources hint at, but never fully explain. There are suggestions of romantic involvement, though this is never stated explicitly. There are hints of political maneuvering, of alliances and rivalries, of respect mixed with wariness. In some ways, Odin and Freyja were mirrors of each other. Both were associated with death and war, but also with wisdom and magic. Both were willing to do morally questionable things in pursuit of their goals. Both contained multitudes, defying simple categorization. The All-Father and the Lady, king and queen of different but overlapping domains, bound together by shared knowledge, shared power, and shared understanding. Chapter 11. Freyja in Midgard. Despite her position in Asgard, Freyja frequently visited Midgard, the world of humans. She seems to have had a genuine fondness for mortals, an interest in their lives that went beyond divine detachment. She walked among them, sometimes revealed as a goddess, but more often disguised, observing, interacting, involving herself in their affairs. When Freyja traveled through Midgard, she often took different names and forms. She might appear as a beautiful woman traveling alone, mysterious and alluring. She might disguise herself as an old woman, testing people's kindness. She might be recognized as a goddess, appearing in dreams or visions. However she manifested, her presence in the mortal world was significant and frequent. Freyja was drawn to certain situations. She attended weddings, blessing unions of those who truly loved each other. She visited women in childbirth, easing their pain, ensuring safe delivery. She walked battlefields after combat, choosing which fallen warriors would come to her hall. But she also simply wandered, exploring the mortal world, experiencing its beauty and tragedy. This regular presence made Freyja one of the most accessible of the Norse deities. While gods like Odin were distant and mysterious, Appearing rarely and usually for their own purposes, Freyja engaged with humans on a personal level. She understood their concerns, made herself available to help with the problems and joys of ordinary existence. Those who honored Freyja, who made offerings at her shrines with respect and sincerity, often found themselves blessed. Young couples struggling to conceive would suddenly expect a child. Farmers facing poor harvests would see crops flourish. People seeking love would meet someone special. Warriors would survive battles they should not have survived. Freyja's blessings often came quietly, without obvious divine intervention. Things would simply go well. But Freyja could also curse, and her wrath was something to be avoided. Those who disrespected love, who broke marriage vows without cause, who hurt others through cruelty or betrayal, these people might face her anger. A man who betrayed his wife might find himself unable to attract any other woman, his reputation destroyed, luck abandoning him. A woman who manipulated others' emotions for selfish gain might find herself unable to form any genuine connection. Freyja's curses worked through subtle influences, making the world align in certain ways. Among mortals, there were women who dedicated themselves particularly to Freyja's service. These were the Volvas, the wise women and priestesses who practiced Seder just as Freyja did, who served as intermediaries between divine and mortal realms. Volvas held important positions in Norse society. They were consulted on matters of importance, asked to use their magic to see the future, to bless important undertakings, to heal the sick. Freyja was the patron of these women, their divine exemplar, the source of their magical tradition. Volvas invoked her name, called upon her for guidance and power, modeled themselves after her, and Freyja watched over them, protected them, sometimes appeared to them in visions to teach them directly. Through these women, Freyja extended her influence in the mortal world, remaining connected to human life. Chapter 12. Sacred Animals and Nature. Cats held a special place in Freyja's symbolism and worship. Her chariot was pulled by cats, and felines were considered sacred to her throughout Scandinavia. Cats in Norse society were valued for practical reasons, keeping homes and farms free of mice and rats. But they were also appreciated for their other qualities, their independence, their grace, their mysterious nature. Unlike dogs, which bond closely with humans, cats maintain a certain distance even while living among people. They cannot be commanded or controlled in the same way. They choose to associate with humans, but always on their own terms. They are affectionate when they wish to be, aloof when it suits them. This independence resonated with Freyja's own nature. She too was powerful in her own right, making her own choices, refusing to be constrained by what others thought she should do. Cats are also creatures of mystery, active in twilight and darkness, moving silently, seeing what others cannot see. They inhabit a liminal space between wild and tame, between nature and civilization. And Freyja too moved between realms, between Asgard and Midgard, between life and death, between the ordered world of the Aesir and the wilder magic of the Vanir. In homes where Freyja was honored, cats were treated well. To harm a cat was seen as potentially drawing Freyja's disfavor. Cats that chose to stay in a household were seen as bringing luck. The specific cats that pulled Freyja's chariot were large and powerful, likely resembling Norwegian forest cats, gray in color, sleek and strong enough to pull a divine chariot through the sky. The boar was another animal sacred to Freyja, representing a different aspect of her nature. Boars in Norse culture symbolized several important things. They were ferocious fighters, defending themselves with courage and savagery when threatened. But they were also connected to prosperity and abundance, as pigs were valuable livestock, providers of meat and wealth. The dual nature of the boar, both dangerous and beneficial, both wild and domesticated, perfectly matched Freyja's own complexity. She was gentle and fierce, loving and warlike, a provider of abundance and a dealer of death. Freyja's specific boar, Hildisvini, had golden bristles that shone in the light. This golden color connected him to wealth and the sun, to life and growth and prosperity. The falcon, the form Freyja could take when wearing her magical cloak, represented yet another facet of her nature. Falcons are birds of prey, hunters that kill with precision and speed. They have extraordinary vision, able to spot small prey from tremendous heights. They are fast, agile, masterful flyers, and they represent a kind of ultimate freedom, the ability to soar above the earth, to go anywhere the sky reaches. For Freyja to take falcon form meant she could transcend ordinary limitations. She could travel vast distances quickly. She could escape any confinement. She could gain perspective by rising above situations and seeing larger patterns. The falcon's perspective connects to Freyja's practice of cedar. Magic that deals with fate and prophecy requires the ability to see patterns, to understand how events connect, to perceive the larger picture. The bird's eye view is both literal when Freyja flies and metaphorical, representing her ability to see what others miss. Chapter 13. Freyja's Daughters. Though much of Freyja's story involves her own adventures, she was also a mother, and her daughters were important to her even if the sources tell us little about them. The elder daughter was named Hnos, which means treasure in Old Norse. To call someone a treasure is to say they are precious beyond measure, valued above gold or gems. Hnos was Freyja's treasure, a living embodiment of love between the goddess and her lost husband Odin. Hnos must have been extraordinarily beautiful, inheriting her mother's legendary appearance. The sources tell us that her name became a common noun, that anything especially beautiful or precious might be called a Hnos. What we know of Hnos is limited. She lived in Asgard with her mother, was presumably raised among the gods, learned from Freyja and the other deities. After losing Odin, after all her failed searching, Hnos must have been even more precious to Freyja, one of the few connections remaining to the love she had lost. She would have been protective, attentive, determined that her daughter would be safe and happy, even as she herself dealt with ongoing grief. And Hnos, growing up as the daughter of Freyja, must have had a complex experience. She would have been constantly aware of her mother's sorrow, the tears that turned to gold, the searching that never ended. Yet the name treasure suggests that despite all this complexity, Hnoss was cherished and valued. She brought joy to Freyja, reminded the goddess of love and hope and the good things that endured even when loss threatened to overwhelm everything. Freyja's second daughter was named Gersemi, which means precious or jewel. Like her sister, Gersemi's very name proclaimed her value to her mother. Even less is known about Gersemi than about Hnoss. She appears in the sources primarily as a name, as confirmation that Freyja had two daughters. But this very mention, this preservation of her existence, suggests she mattered, that she was known, that she had some presence in the mythology, even if details have been lost. One can imagine the two sisters growing up together in Thrym, surrounded by beauty and comfort and divine power. Perhaps they were close, sharing the experience of being Freyja's children, of living with a mother who was goddess of love, but whose own heart carried such sorrow. Perhaps they supported each other, formed the kind of bond that comes from shared unique circumstances. What is certain is that they were Freyja's treasures, her precious ones, loved beyond measure. In a life that included so much loss, so much searching and longing, her daughters were sources of joy and pride, and continued connection to life and hope. Chapter 14, Ragnarok and Beyond. All Norse mythology looks forward to Ragnarok, the great final battle, the twilight of the gods when everything ends and possibly begins again. It is the ultimate destiny that gives meaning and urgency to all that comes before. And Freyja, like all the gods, had her role to play when that time came. The sources are less specific about Freyja's actions during Ragnarok than they are about figures like Thor or Odin. We know Thor will face the world serpent, that Odin will be killed by the wolf Fenrir, that the fire giant will burn the world. But what exactly Freyja does is less clear. What we know is that she survives. Unlike many gods who fall in battle, Freyja is counted among those who live through Ragnarok and emerge into the new world that follows. This survival is significant. It suggests that the forces Freyja represents, love and life and fertility and magic, are so fundamental that they cannot be destroyed even by the ending of everything. Perhaps Freyja fought during Ragnarok, wielding magic against chaos, defending Asgard. Perhaps she worked to protect her hall and those under her care. Perhaps she fought not with weapons but with magic, working to mitigate destruction, to ensure not everything was lost. Or perhaps as a goddess who already ruled over the dead, she had special responsibilities during this time when so many would die. Perhaps she helped guide the transition, helped souls move from life to death, and eventually to whatever came after. The warriors in her hall would certainly fight. They had been preparing for this, training and waiting. When the call came, they would pour forth from Thrym to join the armies of the gods. And Freyja would be with them, the warrior goddess showing the full extent of her martial nature. Ragnarok was not simply the end. It was also a cleansing, destruction that would make way for renewal. After the fires and flooding, after the battles and deaths, after everything was torn down, a new world would emerge. The sources describe it as green and beautiful, fertile and filled with life. It was a world reborn, starting fresh. Certain gods would survive to inhabit this new world, and Freyja would be there, one of the few of the older generation to survive, carrying forward her knowledge and power into this fresh beginning. As a goddess of fertility and growth, she would surely be involved in helping life establish itself again. As a goddess of love, she would watch over the relationships that would form. As keeper of ancient wisdom, she would be a link to what was lost. Two humans would survive as well, hidden away while the world burned. Their names were Lif and Lifthrasir, life and life yearning, and they would become parents of a new human race. Freyja, with her domain over fertility and her connection to mortals, would likely be involved in blessing this new humanity, ensuring they could thrive in the renewed world. The Norse conception of time was not linear but cyclical. Everything that happens has happened before and will happen again. Ragnarok itself might occur over and over, each world age ending in fire, each followed by rebirth. In this understanding, Freyja's survival takes on even greater significance. She is eternal, not in the sense of never changing, but in the sense of always continuing. She persists through the cycles, carrying forward the essential principles she represents. Love and beauty and fertility and magic and war and death, these are fundamental aspects of existence, present in every world age, necessary for life to function. Freyja is thus not merely a character in a story, but a principle, a force, an embodiment of things that are always true, always present, always necessary. Chapter 15. Closing Reflections. The stories of Freyja did not end with the Viking Age, did not disappear when Christianity spread through Scandinavia. Her legacy persisted in ways both obvious and subtle, woven into culture and language and memory. Friday, the sixth day of the week, takes its name from Freyja. Place names throughout Scandinavia reference her. Folk traditions preserved elements of her worship long after official conversion. In modern times, there has been a rediscovery and renewed appreciation of Norse mythology and Freyja specifically. She resonates with contemporary people perhaps because she refuses to be confined by simple categories. She is not merely the love goddess or merely the war goddess, but both and more. She is beautiful, but also powerful. She is gentle, but also fierce. She makes her own choices, pursues her own desires, refuses to be constrained by what others think she should be. Freyja's story also speaks to universal human experiences, loss and longing, which she knew through Odin's disappearance, the willingness to pay any price for something you truly want, which she showed in acquiring Brisingamen, the balance between different aspects of self, between seeming opposites that somehow coexist, the understanding that beauty and violence, creation and destruction, love and death are all interwoven in existence. To understand Freyja is to accept contradiction, to hold opposite ideas simultaneously without needing to resolve them. She is a goddess of love who is also a goddess of war. She is beautiful and desirable, but also powerful and dangerous. She is connected to life and fertility, but also to death and the slain. These contradictions are not flaws, but essential to who she is. They reflect that life itself is contradictory, that the same person can contain multitudes. The Norse did not need their deities to be purely good or purely anything. They understood that divine beings could be many things at once, could act in ways that seemed contradictory, but were actually consistent with a deeper nature. Freyja embodied this understanding perfectly. She could weep tears of gold over her lost husband and also pursue what she desired without shame. She could be tender toward her daughters and also choose warriors for her hall. All of this was Freyja, all of it authentic. And so we come to the end of our journey through Freyja's story, though in a sense, her story has no end. The goddess continues in myth and memory, in modern worship and cultural legacy, in the hearts of all who are touched by tales of love and loss, beauty and strength, sorrow and joy intermingled. As you rest now, as sleep comes gently, may you carry with you something of Freyja's story. May you remember that beauty and strength can coexist, that complexity is not weakness but richness, that loss does not have to mean despair, that searching can be its own kind of meaning even when what we seek remains unfound. May your dreams be peaceful, touched perhaps by the goddess who knows both joy and sorrow, who has walked through all the realms, who understands the full spectrum of experience. And may you wake refreshed, renewed, ready to embrace your own complexity, your own contradictions, your own authentic self. Rest well. The story is complete, and sleep awaits.